Hi, I'm Adam in Wales and this is my board gaming vlog, and last year I made a video about top 10 mechanisms used in trick-taking games, and it was one of my most popular videos that I've made. I really enjoyed making it. I love playing trick-taking games. I've designed 2 trick-taking games, Pikoko and Throne, which both came out over the last year or 18 months or so. And there was one thing that bothered me about that video, and it was the fact that I kind of fluffed the explanation of what a trick-taking game is compared to a climbing game. How is a climbing game different? The way I defined climbing games was that you had to get rid of all your cards before the other players, and of course that is not the defining feature of a climbing game. That is a shedding game, and it just happens that most climbing games are also shedding games. So in this video I really want to pin down what are the differences between a trick-taking game, a climbing game, and a shedding game, and where do those 3 things kind of merge together. So Uno is our main poster child for the shedding games right now. Everybody knows Uno. You play a card that matches the rank or matches the colour of the previous cards played, and you can play sets of cards. I don't need to go into Uno, I don't even have a copy of Uno to show you, but there have been numerous games a bit like Uno that have come out. Most of them have very little control, very little strategy in them, but I wanted to show you a particularly interesting example of a shedding game which has no trick-taking or climbing aspects to it, and that is the game Fuji Flush by Freedom and Freeze. Fuji Flush is a game for 3 to 8 players where players race to get rid of all their cards. On a player's turn, they place any card face up on the table in front of them. If the revealed card is lower than a previous card, it has no effect. If it's higher than a card which has already been played, then the lower card is flushed. This means it is discarded and the owner of the card draws a new one from the deck into their hand. If a player ever plays a card which matches 1 or more previously played cards, their totals are added together. If this now beats another card which is currently revealed, the revealed card is discarded and the owner draws a new card. If your card is still on the table when it comes around to your turn again, that card is now discarded, but you don't draw a new one. You play a card as normal, and hence your hand of cards is reduced in size. You win the game if you're the first player to run out of cards in your hand and you have nothing revealed on the table. So in a shedding game we are trying to get rid of all our cards before the other players, and that is the defining feature of what we would call that genre of games. Let's look at trick-taking games. So what exactly is a trick-taking game? In a trick-taking game, each player has a hand of cards, and the starting player leads a trick by playing any card from their hand onto the table. Then each player in turn plays a card from their hand. If possible, each subsequent player must play a card matching the suit of the starting player's card. This is called following suit. If a player is unable to follow suit because they have no such cards in their hand, then they can play any card. Many trick-taking games feature a suit which is more powerful than all the others. This is called the trump suit. When all players have played a card, then the trick is complete, and the player who played the highest ranked card in the led suit, i.e. the suit matching that of the starting player's card, usually wins the trick. However, if a trump card has been played into the trick, then the player who played the highest rank trump would win instead. The cards from the trick are collected by the winning player, and this is called taking a trick. All games differ in how the players win points from their tricks. Okay, I suspect trick-taking is probably fairly familiar to most people who'd be watching a video like this, particularly people who watch my channel, because I go on about trick-taking games all the time, right? So let's give an example of a trick-taking game that I haven't covered before. We're going to look at the game Wizard, which is very similar to a game I've previously covered called Skull King. In Wizard, players attempt to score points by making accurate bets as to how many tricks they will win in each round of play. In the first round of play, only 1 trick is played, then 2 tricks will be played in round 2, 3 in round 3, and so on. A trump suit is determined for the round, and then players take it in turn to declare how many tricks they're going to win. The starting player may play any card, and then each player must play a card matching the suit of the first card. However, as an exception to the rule, a wizard or jester can be played at any time. When all players have played 1 card, the trick is won either by the first wizard played, or if there is no wizard, then the highest trump that's been played, or if there is no trump and no wizard, then the trick is won by the highest card matching the suit of the starting player. But playing a jester will always lose you the trick. If a player correctly predicts how many tricks they will win, then they score 20 points, plus 10 points for each trick that they've taken. Players who are incorrect count up how far out their bid was, and they multiply that number by 10. They take this as negative points. After 10 or 12 or 15 or 20 rounds, depending on the player count, then the game ends and the highest scorer wins. Okay, so now we have an example of a shedding game, we have an example of a trick-taking game. So is it possible to have a climbing game that has no trick-taking elements and has no shedding elements? I must admit, this one taxed my brain a little bit trying to work out, do I have anything in my collection like that, where it's pure climbing? So the defining feature in a climbing game is the fact that when you play a card, it must be higher than the cards that have been played before. Sometimes higher or matching. But the climbing bit is the fact that each time you're going higher, higher, higher until eventually somebody can't play. And the game I'm going to show you is a game called 23 by Amigo. This is pure climbing, no trick-taking, no shedding. In 23, the deck is made up of numbers 1 to 23, each multiple times in the deck, and each player starts with a hand of 12 cards. The player holding the 1 card starts by playing it onto the table. Then the next player must play, pass, or fold. If they play, they must add a set of 1 or more cards to the pile. The cards must be matching each other, and they must be equal to or higher than the last card which was played on the pile. If the cards are more than 1 higher than the previous played card, then the player takes 1 penalty chip for each number that has been skipped. And 3 times in the game, a player may use a bonus chip. This allows the player to play cards as if the top card of the pile was up to 5 higher or 5 lower than its actual face value. If a player passes, they do not play a card, and they instead take a penalty chip. A player can choose to pass and take 2 penalty chips if they want. In that case, the next player is forced to play. They may not pass. If a player chooses to fold, then they exit the round. In this case, the player takes as many penalty chips as they have cards remaining in their hand. And if a player plays their last card, then they get to discard 3 of their penalty chips. The first round ends when all players have either played all their cards or when they've all folded. After 2 complete rounds, the player with the fewest penalty chips wins. What happens if you combine shedding and trick-taking? Well, once again, Friedemann Friese has the answer, and he developed a game a long time ago now called Foppen, but it's been re-released over the last year, and now it's called Fool. So this is a trick-taking shedding game. In Fool, players are attempting to get rid of their cards. Cards left in their hand at the end of a round are worth negative points. The lead player may play any card, and the other players must follow suit if able. If not able, then they can play any card. There's no trump suit. The highest card in the led suit wins the trick, and the winner of the trick plays the first card in the next trick, but the loser of the trick takes the Fool token and does not get to play in the next trick at all. Ones are wild. They always count as being of the lead colour. A round ends when one player has run out of cards. They score 10 positive points, or 0 points if they took the Fool token in that final trick. All other players score the face values of the cards in their hands as negative points. The wild 1 cards score negative 5 points. The game ends when a player has scored 80 negative points after a series of tricks. So Fool follows most of the standard trick-taking rules. You take it in turn to play 1 card. Once everybody's played a card, then that trick is over, albeit one player won't be playing if they were the Fool. But it also has that shedding thing. What we're trying to do is be the first player to run out of cards, so it fits into both categories. But what happens if we take a climbing game and combine it with a shedding game? Well, the first example is a game that I played a lot as a teenager, and that was a public domain game which we called... but the boxed version is a game from Yellow, produced by Richard Garfield, and this is the game Ghost. In Ghost, players aim to get rid of all their cards before all other players. Each player starts the game with 4 cards in hand and a pile of cards face down in front of them. This is called the mansion. On your turn, you may play 1 or more identical cards, playing them onto a central pile. The played cards must be equal or higher than the top card on the pile. Or you may try your luck by drawing a card from the deck and attempting to play it onto the pile. Or if you cannot equal or beat the card on top of the pile, then you pick up all the cards in the pile and place them into your hand. If at the end of your turn you have less than 4 cards, you draw back up until you've got 4 in hand. Playing double or treble sets of cards allows you to immediately take another turn. Playing 4 of a kind causes all of the cards in the pile to be discarded from the game. A yellow card can always be played regardless of the value of the top card of the pile, and a yellow 1 resets the pile to a value of 1. Red cards, numbered 3 and 12, are played normally, but only other red cards or yellow cards or 4 of a kind can be played on top of them. The blue X card is wild. It can be used in sets with all other cards, and a blue 8 switches the direction of play. A blue 11 causes all cards in the pile to be discarded. And once that draw deck is empty, and a player has no cards in hand, then they play blind by drawing cards from their mansion unseen, and either placing them on top of the pile if they're able to, or otherwise picking up all the cards from the pile into their hand. When a player's hand and mansion are both empty, they're eliminated from the game. This is a good thing, because the last remaining player loses the game. So Ghost is a climbing game. You have to play higher cards each time you play. I mean, sometimes you can reset it, but basically you either play higher cards or you draw the deck. But it's also a shedding game because you're trying to get rid of your cards before all the other players. And in common with games like Uno, it doesn't have an awful lot of control or strategy to it. It's kind of a game where you go along with the ride and it's chaos and fun and all of that. I loved it as a teenager in the sort of public domain version that I played. I'm not sure how often I would dip back into it now, but it's a hugely popular game, shared all around the world by backpackers in its original form. And Ghost is a lovely sort of lovely, beautifully drawn version of the game. Let's look at a more sophisticated example of a climbing game that's combined with a shedding game. So something with a little bit more strategy, in fact with quite a lot of strategy and skill to it. And this is the 2 or 3 player game Haggis by Indie Boards and Cards. The aim in a game of Haggis is to empty your hand of cards while capturing scoring cards during play. Each player has a jack, a queen and a king face up in front of them and 14 cards in their hand. Players then have the option of betting that they will be the first to shed all of the cards from their hand. One player starts by playing a set of 1 or more cards. These could be matching cards, for example, 3 of a kind or 4 of a kind. The king, the queen and the jack can always be used as wild cards, or as a 13, a 12 or an 11 respectively. A player might alternatively choose to play a sequence of individual cards, or a sequence of pairs or triplets, etc. Each subsequent player must play a higher ranking combination of exactly the same nature and number of cards, or they must pass. And players continue successively adding cards to the table until all but one player has passed. The player of the highest combination wins all the cards from the pile and leads with a new set of 1 or more cards. And the round ends when all but one player has shed the cards from their hand. The player who went out first gains all the cards from the remaining player's hand and a few cards which were not dealt at the start of the round. These are used for scoring. Whenever a player goes out, they score 5 points for each card in the hand of the player with the most cards, and at the end of the round, players score points from the cards they have captured throughout the round, and also they score points for successful bets. Haggis also features a few special combinations called bombs. So a bomb would be, for example, a jack and a king, or a 3, 5, 7, 9, all of different suits. These can be played at any time and they will beat any other combination. Okay, so that has a real trick-taking feel to it, although it is not a trick-taking game. What I mean by that is the fact that we are making bets, and we're trying to hold on to the lead by playing cards, and then if we are the one that manages to play the highest set, then we get to lead again, starting a new sort of run of cards. So it feels like a trick-taking game. It's going to appeal to trick-taking gamers, and so I think that's where often the climbing and trick-taking games get conflated, because they have a very similar feel and a very similar appeal. But it's not a trick-taking game. It's a climbing game and it's a shedding game. So can we come up with an example of a trick-taking game which is also a climbing game? If we ask Friedemann Friese, once again we have the answer, and this is Fünf Gurken. In Fünf Gurken, there are no suits, just the numbers 1 to 15, each represented 4 times. The starting player can play any card from their hand, and then each subsequent player must either play a matching or higher numbered card, or they can play the lowest card from their hand. The player who wins the trick by playing the highest card then leads the next trick. And the only trick which matters for scoring is the 7th and final trick of the round. The player who wins this trick must take the number of cucumbers indicated on their winning card. And when a player has collected 5 cucumbers after 2, 3, 4 rounds, then they're eliminated from the game. The game is won by the final player remaining. So in Fünf Gurken, we're not trying to shed cards. It's not a shedding game. We are playing tricks. Each player takes one card. They play one card at a time, and we go round and then we see who's played the highest card. But the rule is you have to play the higher card than what's gone previously, or you kind of pass by throwing away your lowest card from your hand. So it's got a climbing mechanism in it, but it is very clearly a trick-taking game as well. Now, is it possible to combine all three? Is there an example of a game which is a shedding game and a trick-taking game and a climbing game? And I discovered one last year and it's brilliant, so I wanted to bring it to your attention. This is the game Vampire Queen from Smithspiel. It's in the same range as Skull King and Voodoo Prince, but this one is by Wolfgang Kramer, who is just a master of game design, and it's nice to see him dipping into that sort of trick-taking, climbing sort of area. Vampire Queen is a climbing game for 3 to 12 players. Players are dealt a set number of cards and the remainder are not used in the game. The start player plays a set of one or more matching cards, and each subsequent player must play exactly the same number of cards of a higher value than the previous played set. If unable to do so, then the player must pass. After all players have played once or passed, then the cards from the round are discarded, and the player of the highest set starts the next round. There are 4 Vampire Queens, which are wild when played in a set, or valued at 14 when played alone. There are also 2 Vampire Slayers, and only the start player of a round can play a Vampire Slayer. If they do so, each other player must play exactly 1 Vampire card. This can be higher or lower than the previously played cards, and the Vampire Slayers count as value 0 in these rounds. The Vampire Queens count as value 1 here. And whoever plays the highest card picks up all the cards played in that little Vampire Slayer round. And when one player runs out of cards, the round is over. Players score negative points, equal to the face values of all the cards in their hands. And if you're holding a Vampire Slayer at the end of the round, it's worth negative 15 or negative 20 points. At the end of the game, the player with the fewest negative points wins. So I've thoroughly enjoyed Vampire Queen. It is a trick-taking game, it is a climbing game, it is a shedding game. I think online, I see this debated a lot. People feel quite passionate about this. They don't like it when people say that a climbing game is a trick-taking game. You often see it. People make a list of their favourite trick-taking games and then a little climbing game will creep in there. Well, my point to you is sometimes those people are right. Sometimes those games are not just climbing games, they're both. And actually, trick-taking games and climbing games share a very similar ancestry anyway. I covered this a little bit in my old video about the top 10 trick-taking mechanisms. So they have the same sort of lineage. It's just that in the East we went off in one direction, in the West we went off in a different direction, and we ended up with these modern games that we play today. If you enjoyed my video, please watch some more. I've got lots more on my channel, Adam's Board Game Wales. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Board Game Wales. Board Game Geek, I'm Adam78. Thank you very much for watching. All the best.